Well, good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's presentation hosted by the City and County of Denver. My name is Benita Curry, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. So I'll talk you through the South Central Community Transportation Projects. I'd like to invite Francisco to welcome our Spanish speakers. Francisco.
Buenas tardes a todos. Es un placer para mí darles la bienvenida a esta reunión auspiciada por la ciudad y el condado de Denver. Y tengo el placer de anunciarles que esta reunión es bilingüe y yo seré su intérprete esta noche. Si hacen el favor de seguir las instrucciones en la pantalla, conéctese usando una tableta, computadora o incluso su teléfono y seleccionen el icono del globo en la parte inferior derecha de la pantalla, seleccionen el idioma de su preferencia y podemos proveer la interpretación. Thank you, Benita.
Thanks, Francisco. Well, let's introduce your leads for tonight's presentation. I am joined by a number of transportation experts, including Ellen Forhofer and Bryce Hamilton, both of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. We also have several members of our project team with us tonight who will assist in answering your questions during our Q&A breaks. Welcome, team. Let's take care of a few housekeeping details before we get started. Please click on the Q&A button on the bottom toolbar of your screen to type in your questions to the project team. We will be monitoring the Q&A box to forward questions to the project team. Our goal is to answer as many questions as possible during our time together. You can begin to type now your questions and throughout our time together tonight. We'd like to take this moment also to make sure this is a safe place for everyone to ask questions and to share their thoughts. Please remember to be kind and respectful of others and to kindly share your thoughts and questions. Tonight, we're going to give you an overview of the project and an update on project schedules since last we met. We'd also like to show you how to use a new tool that we will be using to collect your feedback. We'll move on to show you how your feedback was incorporated into our recommendations for phase 1 projects before we break for another Q&A session. From there, we'll discuss the results of our concept surveys for phase 2 projects. We'll stop to welcome your questions again before we leave you with information on how to access program information and how to stay engaged. Now, let's get started with Ellen. Ellen.
Thanks, Benita. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button for a second there. As Benita mentioned, my name is Ellen Forhofer, and I am a project manager within DOTI, the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. I first want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and carving out time of your evenings to speak about important bike and pedestrian safety improvements throughout South Central Denver. As a refresher, you may remember that between now and 2023, Denver will be concentrating in 3 areas of the city to implement a system of bikeways. We're calling these areas Central, Northwest, and South Central, but tonight we'll be focusing on the South Central area. DOTI has funding to implement 125 miles of bikeways over the next 3 years to provide more travel options. While most of our conversation tonight will be focused on safety improvements for people biking and walking, these improvements will make it safer for everyone who travels on the street, no matter which mode of transportation they choose. And the South Central area covers 12 neighborhoods that you can see listed here. Roughly the boundaries are the Platte River to the west, downtown to the north, University Boulevard to the east, and the southern boundary of the city to the south. Again, as a reminder, and just some additional background, the DOTI has organized our work into community transportation networks for several reasons. Why community networks? At the foundation, we're looking to improve safety. We are a Vision Zero city, so all of our projects have safety at the core of what we do. We're also looking to prioritize multimodal projects, provide more choices for people to get around the city of Denver, as well as rapidly build out a network of high comfort connections for people biking with multimodal improvements as well. because we found as we carve out space in our roads to move different ways, we are able to move more people in the same amount of space in our transportation networks. In the community network process, each project follows the bike planning process, which is highlighted by 5 steps that you can see here. The first step is to confirm the bike network to make sure that we are investing the right facilities in the right places throughout the city. We then develop options and move an option into a concept design. From there, we refine and complete that design before pivoting towards construction. And tonight we'll be speaking about projects in different areas of this process. So phase 1 projects, if you can see the box around the later steps in the process, those phase 1 projects have already developed a concept. They are now in the process of refining and completing the design and will pivot towards implementation and construction as early as later this year. Phase 2 projects are in earlier steps of the process. These projects are largely in the concept development phase, and we'll talk about those a little bit later tonight. Really quickly, want to walk through some of the high-level milestones that we've already reached in the program and where we will continue to head as we move forward. The South Central Community Transportation Network began in the spring of 2020. From there, projects began the network verification process, where again, we were looking to make sure that we were investing in the right corridors, making the right improvements in the right places. Phase 1 projects then moved in to develop concepts and finalize those concepts. Earlier this year, those phase 1 projects moved into the refinement of design phase, where they will move towards complete design. And phase 2 projects began in the developing the concept phase and network verification. So today we are here in Q2 of 2021. We're having a public meeting to discuss where we're at on the phase 1 projects as they move towards final design, as well as give an update on what we heard in the concept surveys for phase 2 projects. As we look ahead in the future, we do anticipate coming back to our stakeholders and to the public later this summer or fall as phase 1 projects near implementation and phase 2 projects have concepts developed and are moving towards final design. Just want to highlight some of the public engagement statistics that we have done to date through this program. We began this process with an interactive map tool that was citywide. We gathered multimodal feedback, over 1,300 data points of that multimodal feedback, which led into the network verification process, as well as identifying multimodal improvements throughout the 3 networks in Denver that are moving forward today. We also had several surveys, network verification surveys, concept surveys, design surveys. We've had over 3,400 responses on the multiple types of surveys that we've offered through this program. And we've also held several community meetings, just like the one we're holding tonight. 1,300 plus people have attended those virtual meetings. And we've also offered plenty of office hour sessions, over 120 of them, to provide an additional touch point for people who want to ask questions or just hear more about projects and spend time with the project team talking through that on a more one-to-one basis. So tonight we're going to unveil a new tool for community input called Conveyo. Conveyo is how we will be collecting feedback on the phase 1 designs that are nearing complete design. This will be a really good opportunity for our stakeholders and the public to give feedback on the design, make sure that we're getting it right so that as we head towards construction, we can have the best project possible. These pictures were taken before we added in the South Central Community Network. So just want to highlight the bit.ly to reach our community network page is bit.ly/SCCTN Conveyo, that's KONVEIO. And I do want to note that it is capitalization sensitive, so please use it directly as it's written here. There will be an option when you reach this page where you see West Denver Safer Streets and Northwest Community Transportation Network, there is an option now for South Central Community Transportation Network, as well as a picture that you can click on. Once you're at the South Central Community Network page, you will see, instead of a West Denver Safer Streets description, you'll see the description of community transportation networks in South Central area and be able to get some background on the projects and the network itself. If you scroll down on the next slide, you'll see the draft concept designs. So we have the 60% designs. That is an engineering term that just basically means we're heading towards that complete design and starting to think about construction. But this is a really good opportunity to get input and make sure that we are looking at the right improvements in the right places on these corridors. So you'll see all of the designs available here. You can click on the red buttons, which will then take you to the individual project page, where you can read more background information about the corridor and learn about the different designs that are proposed along the corridor. From here, you can either use the embedded map that's as part of the page, or if you're having trouble loading on your desktop or on your phone, we do have a button here. It will say a mobile-friendly design. It's the same thing, it's just a different way of seeing it that is sometimes easier to load, what we found with that red button. So you can either click on the map that shows up on the screen, or you can click the red button, which will take you to the same map where you're able to scroll around, zoom in, zoom out, look at the designs, and click anywhere to leave a comment. You're also able to like other people's comments and respond to them as well. So it effectively extends our community meeting time and allows folks to really dig into the concepts on their own time because it is a lot of corridors. We have 11 that we'll be talking about this evening and that will be on Conveyo for the next 2.5 weeks. So with that, just wanted to hand off now to our consultants to speak about the phase 1 projects that are anticipated to begin installation as soon as later this year in 2021. So just these phase 1 projects are in those phases 4 and 5. So we're refining and completing the design as we move towards construction. And again, want to remind everyone of the link to get to Conveyo, the tool that we are using to collect community feedback on these 60% designs. That's at bit.ly/SCCTN Conveyo, KONVEIO. And again, that is CAPS sensitive. So please enter that exactly as you see here. And we are planning to close the feedback period for the community on May 14th. That's about 3 weeks from now. So with that, I'll hand it off to one of our consultants on the team, Trung, to speak about South Pearl Street.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so for South Pearl Street, as part of the phase 1 projects on the next slide here, we got a lot of feedback about needing to provide a really strong north-south connection in Wash Park. So that's really the primary objective behind this project. And some of the feedback that we got when we were developing the preliminary concept and then into developing the actual design that you'll see on Conveyo is that there needed to be some kind of connection to the Cherry Creek Trail. And so as a part of the project, we included a connection via 2nd Avenue over to Emerson Street, and then crossing over and then eventually connecting to 3rd Avenue as well as the Cherry Creek Trail. So I'm really excited about the potential for that to be a really great crossing, providing a safe and comfortable way to get to the Cherry Creek Trail from Wash Park and from Pearl Street. And then we had also heard from the public and you all about speeding concerns. And so the project includes traffic calming along Pearl Street, as well as design treatments at the major intersections to make sure that crossing on Pearl Street is good and comfortable. So then on the next slide, we'll talk about Exposition Avenue. So the western point is Broadway and the eastern point is Wash Park. And one of the challenges with this project was thinking about the potential increase in traffic as a result of the installation of traffic signals on Exposition at Broadway and Lincoln Street. And so the design includes a traffic diversion to basically maintain Exposition Avenue as a neighborhood street. And then in addition to that, we also included traffic calming treatments, curb extensions to manage traffic volumes and traffic speeds. And the curb extensions also make it easier to see and be seen at intersections and to cross the street. And then finally, at least for the projects that I will talk about on the next slide here, Kentucky Avenue is just south of Exposition Avenue. And one of the exciting things about this project is the potential for it to connect and provide a connection across I-25. And so this project in particular is just Kentucky Avenue between Logan Street and Wash Park. But there will be a future connection that we're currently working on, actually, that will include Logan Street and Mississippi Avenue to connect down to the future neighborhood bikeway on Sherman Street. And so like the other neighborhood bikeway projects like Pearl Street and Exposition Avenue, the design includes traffic calming and curb extensions to make it easier to travel along and cross the side streets when you're traveling along Kentucky Avenue, whether you're a bicyclist or a pedestrian or a driver. And I think at this point, I'll pass it on to Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Trung. Yeah, I'm going to kind of continue through a couple more corridors doing similar to what Trung was talking about, but I'm going to start with East 7th Avenue. And as you can see, this is from Broadway all the way to William Street, so just south of Cheeseman Park. So it's a pretty good stretch. And one thing to point out is that we kind of have two different segments here. We have kind of the 7th Avenue Business District, which is going to be more of a dedicated bike lane. And then we also have a neighborhood bikeway segment that runs from Pennsylvania all the way to William Street. And one of the things we wanted, I'll kind of hit a couple highlights. And one of the things that the safety data is telling us that there's been both bicycle and pedestrian crashes at the intersection of 7th and Sherman. So our design has really incorporated a median refuge island and curb extensions there to reduce the motor vehicle speeds and also kind of increase the visibility for all roadway users at that intersection. So really making that a safer crossing, and then also facilitating a crossing across 7th, but also to Broadway on a dedicated bike lane. Because one of the things we additionally heard a lot about was making sure there's a clear connection to Cherry Creek in this area of the city. And initially we looked at going south on 7th, south on Sherman all the way to 6th, but that became a pretty big challenge. So we really decided to look at creating a connection via Broadway. And so we have a short-term solution that connects to the sidewalk and through the plaza to the Cherry Creek trail. And then the long-term improvement is happening with the Broadway cycle track, and that will be constructed in 2022. Next, I want to hit on Franklin Street. And Franklin Street is from Cheeseman Park all the way north to 21st Avenue. And this is really providing a great connection through North Capitol Hill. And one of the things that we really did hear about on this specific corridor is the crossings of 13th and 14th are very challenging for people to navigate. And what we really did there was two things. We looked at curb extensions on 13th and 14th to to shorten the crossing distance for people on bicycles and people walking. And it also kind of daylight those intersections a little bit to allow people, for all roadway users, to be more visible. And the other thing we wanted to do too is kind of reduce the volume of traffic along this corridor to create a neighborhood bikeway segment. So really kind of taking what the kind of Cheeseman Park Road is like and extending it north up to Colfax. So really kind of trying to slow down the street there and allow it to be more comfortable for folks biking and walking. And finally, I'm going to talk about North Sherman Street. And this is the North Sherman Street that starts south of the Capitol and goes all the way to 7th Avenue. So really kind of ties into the 7th Avenue bikeway there. And one of the things the community identified was speeding and crossing challenges associated with the intersections, kind of the larger intersections here, and specifically 8th Avenue and Sherman. And our design kind of addresses these concerns through the addition of curb extensions, but also implementing a new traffic signal at 8th Avenue, because if anybody's actually crossed there, they know with the amount of people trying to get to Spear Avenue, sometimes traffic does queue across that intersection, and the gaps across that intersection can be very difficult. So this will really help create a protected crossing for people walking and biking, and people driving as well. And finally, I wanted to point out that the safety data again does tell us that there have been multiple pedestrian crashes at 12th Avenue in Sherman. And so what we really did was look at providing curb extensions along this corridor. And as many of you know, this is also a transit corridor. So we were a little bit limited in what we could do because we will still want to facilitate a multimodal intersection. But what that will do really kind of reduce traffic speeds and then also daylight that intersection. Now it's time to hear from Matt.
Thanks, Josh. I'll be taking us through our last couple corridors before we continue with the rest of our meeting. I'm going to start with 13th Avenue. 13th Avenue is proposed to be a westbound protected bike lane, providing a connection between the existing protected bike lane at North Lincoln Street and to North Grant Street to the east, connecting through the Capitol Hill area. Throughout the planning process, we heard concerns about speeding, sight distance issues, and we observed high bike and pedestrian crash rates at the Lincoln and Grant intersections. The proposed designs that we're looking at help address the speeding and sight distance concerns by repurposing an existing travel lane to be a protected bike lane. This will help slow speeds along the corridor and also provide enhanced safety for all roadway users. At larger intersections, clear definition of space will help make movements more predictable and make vulnerable users more visible. Lastly, I just wanted to note here that a bike signal with a separated bike phase and conflict pavement markings is proposed at the intersection of Lincoln. This will give bicyclists dedicated space at the intersection and a separate time to cross to remove any conflicts there. Moving on to 14th Avenue, this is pretty similar in scope to the 13th Avenue project. It's going to be a eastbound protected bike lane connecting the existing PBL at the Denver Art Museum and continuing east to Grant Street, again, through the Capitol Hill area. The concerns that we heard during the process on this one was related to high bike and pedestrian crash rates, as well as red light running at the Lincoln and Grant intersections again. So the design approach at this is, again, similar to 13th, going to be repurposing an existing travel lane to be a protected bike lane to slow speeds and provide enhanced safety. At larger intersections, a clear definition of space is going to help make the movements more predictable again and increase visibility. For this corridor at Broadway, that looks like a separated bike lane from the turning movements for the eastbound approach. That's going to help provide a dedicated space for bicyclists and additional safety and comfort at the intersection. And then at Grant Street, bikes will have a protected crossing of 14th Avenue to continue north on the existing side path along the west side of North Grant Street. So the next corridor we'll be looking at is Bayout Avenue. Bayout Avenue is going to be an east-west neighborhood bikeway extending from North Cherokee Street on the west to North Downing Street on the eastern limits. As you may know or have been out on yourself, this corridor is operated as a shared street as part of the city's program that they implemented last year. And it's already had some installments and improvements installed this year to help make that feel of the shared street more permanent. During our planning process, we heard concerns about some difficult crossings at larger intersections like Broadway and Lincoln. And then we also heard concerns about speeding and traffic volume. So to help address these, we're looking to implement traffic diversion and traffic calming elements along the corridor. The traffic diversion is going to help maintain the feel of that shared street. And then traffic calming elements like curb extensions and a neighborhood traffic circle will help reduce the speeds throughout the corridor. These improvements will all combine help improve visibility and daylighting at the intersection and help define spaces for all the users. Lastly, continued efforts are ongoing for evaluating the signal timing and further traffic diversion at some of the difficult crossings. The next corridor is South Cherokee Street and West First Avenue. This corridor is proposed to be a combination of a buffered bike lane and a neighborhood bikeway. Throughout the planning process, we heard concerns about visibility at intersections and difficult crossings, speeding, and then we also had some feedback concerning the removal of on-street parking. To help address these concerns, we really wanted to evaluate the appropriate facility type along the corridor. The Baker Neighborhood Transportation Master Plan had already been completed and recommended this facility to be a buffered bike lane for the entire extents. But based off of our analysis of the existing conditions along the corridor, it was recommended that the corridor be a buffered bike lane for the southern half and a neighborhood bikeway for the northern half, with the barrier being at Bayout Avenue. Implementation of the correct facility type along the corridor really helps us get a better management of speeds and repurposing of space along the roadway, and installation of traffic calming elements like curb extensions really helps provide a more comfortable feel along the corridor as well. All of that is to say that we're looking to increase the visibility at the intersections and really defining space for the users. Lastly, implementation of a neighborhood bikeway on the northern half of the facility has a added benefit of not only being the appropriate solution for the speeds and volumes out there, but it also has the side benefit of maintaining the existing on-street parking, which is actually used as a good traffic calming element for adding friction and reducing speeds along the corridor. The last corridor I'll mention is North Galapago Street. This is proposed to be a neighborhood bikeway from West 3rd Avenue up to West 13th Avenue. The biggest feedback that we received was about difficult crossings, particularly at 6th Avenue, and also about speeding throughout the corridor. The cross section there is really wide, and so it really invites faster speeds throughout the corridor, and so that's something we wanted to pay a lot of attention to. To help address these concerns, we recommend the implementation of traffic calming elements like curb extensions throughout the corridor to really slow people down, particularly at the intersections, and reduce speeds there. At some of the bigger intersections like 6th, 8th, and 13th, a clear definition of space and defined space for users helps make, again, movements more predictable and vulnerable users more visible. And so Ellen's gonna take it from here.
Actually,
Thanks, Matt.
I think it's my turn, or is it?
Oh, no, sorry, not quite yet.
Oh.
Thanks, Vanita. I appreciate everyone bearing with us as we walked through the high-level elements of each project that is currently available on Conveyo. Again, I just want to highlight that the actual designs, the 60% designs, are available on Conveyo for your feedback. So please do go to that website. We did drop it in the chat so that you can just click that link. Feedback closes May 14th in about 2.5 to 3 weeks. While we walked through the major aspects of what we heard and what we'd be doing to incorporate that feedback, all comments that we receive on Conveyo on these designs will also be reviewed by the team and incorporated as we head towards final design and then construction for these projects. So with that, I know that there have been several questions asked in the Q&A box, so we'll stop for our first question and answer session, and I'll pass it to you, Vanita.
Now it's my turn. Thank you. Well, thanks, Ellen. If you haven't entered your question in the Q&A box, please take a moment and do that now. I'd like to start with a question that came in from Matt. And that question to you, Ellen, is who is making the designs, and have they observed, surveyed the neighborhood and intersections in person?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Matt. It's a very good one. And Dottie, in coordination with our consultant team, many of whom you've heard from tonight, are preparing the designs. It's worth noting in the different phases of the design process that we talked through earlier, the plan team, which are a lot of the consultants you heard from tonight, are the people who did visit the corridors in person. We collected data as we were developing the concepts and hearing from the public. All of that information and data led to the concept development. And these phase 1 projects are now being handed off to design consultants who will pick up that torch, keep carrying it ahead as we refine the design. And we actually have been doing field visits recently. That does involve going out to the field, looking at what is planned from the concept, ensuring that it fits with the geometry of the street and the intersections, and really doing those field truth tests to make sure that what we're planning will in fact work on these corridors. So I just want to highlight at all aspects and steps of the process, regardless who is carrying the torch, we do collect data and analysis as well as public feedback in surveying the intersections and corridors to understand exactly what's going on and make sure that these designs are the right fit. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Ellen. I've got a question for you, Bryce. The question is, where did it go? It's about restaurants. Do you know that question, Bryce?
Yeah, are you talking about
the question from Zach?
7th and Sherman?
Yeah, Zach asked the
Yep.
question, the block of 7th and Sherman is currently blocked off to car traffic for extended restaurant seating. Is this going to be permanent?
So yeah, the answer is no to that. And we are working with right-of-way enforcement to make sure that that permit does not extend through our construction season so that we can implement our 7th Ave bike lane.
Great. Thank you so much, Bryce. I want to come to you, Josh. There is a question about, is there going to be a signal installed on 8th and Sherman?
Yeah, thanks, Benita. The short answer is yes. We went through a warrant and an evaluation process to see what is the best traffic control device for that intersection. We did have a lot of both vehicle movements and bicycle and pedestrian movements to that intersection, and did look at a couple different options, but ultimately Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure thought that the safest traffic control device would be to install a full traffic signal at that intersection. And I can pass it to Bryce as well if he wants to add on to that.
No, yeah, Josh, I think you got it pretty good. Yeah, like you said, there's currently an Ntmp project to improve the pedestrian crossing, and we're just going to be enhancing that by creating a safer bike crossing, including medians and green conflict markings and a crosswalk, not only on the west leg, but also on the east leg.
Thank you, Bryce and Josh. Ellen, I'd like to come back to you. A question from Robert. The question is there any talk of changing Dottie's policy of heavily prioritizing unsustainable and expensive car use over sustainable and affordable bike use?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Robert. Well, first of all, I'd like to speak to the city goals. Already there is a goal citywide to improve mode shift. What I mean when I say that is to have less people traveling in single occupancy vehicles and more people choosing more sustainable ways of traveling, like carpooling, taking the bus or the train, biking or walking. Microtransit like scooters and shared bikes are also part of that citywide goal. And it's worth noting that this goal is such a priority of the city and of Dottie. That's part of why we have funding and are moving forward the community networks like we're talking about today to build out 125 new lane miles of bikeways over 3 years. This is a much faster process than we've ever done before at the city. And I think it really speaks to that commitment. We have had some questions when it comes to trade-offs about specifically parking within our designs. And it's worth noting we do collect data on several of our corridors. We do look at the parking utilization. We also collect feedback from the community as we're developing the concepts and moving towards final design. All of those inputs weigh in addition to data like the vehicle volumes and speeds on a street, to tell us which facility type makes the most sense on each road in the network, right? Our transportation network is not made up of all local streets, is also not made up of only highways, right? And thinking about a multimodal network is similar. There's different facility types for different existing conditions and types of streets. And so we take all of that information into account when deciding which facility type makes the most sense. Some facility types require more parking takes than others, but again, that is not the central concern that we are looking at. We're taking lots of data, lots of public feedback into account to make the decision about which facility type is the safest and which facility type really meets our design goal of designing for someone who is interested but concerned about choosing a bicycle to replace some of their daily trips. So really looking at how we can create the highest comfort facilities, and again, lots of data and feedback play into that decision.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Trung, I'd like to bring you in. A question from James. Will you connect existing bike lanes that run south of Washington from Wash Park over to I-25 to Platte Park, as well as the one mentioned on Logan over I-25?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. Currently, the Denver Moves Bicycles plan doesn't include a connection on Washington Street over I-25. And so really the primary connection that we're working on right now as part of this South Central Community Transportation Network effort is to provide that connection over Logan Street. But really appreciate that comment, and it's something that we should be sure to keep in mind in the future under future efforts.
Thank you. And Bryce, one more question I want to sneak in, I think. It's a question from James. When you add stop signs to slow cross traffic on a given bikeway, could that sometimes lead to removal of stop signs elsewhere on those same cross streets?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, James. So the first thing, we do not add stop signs to slow traffic. We typically add other things such as traffic circles, for example, which I'm sure you've seen on many of these presentations. Sometimes though, in order to prioritize the bicycle movement on a neighborhood bikeway, we will do a stop sign flip if it's two residential streets that are intersecting and it's a two-way stop. We'll flip the stop signs to favor that neighborhood bikeway so that bicycles are prioritized and can move through the corridor without having to stop. So that's the only time that you'll see a stop sign removal is when we're flipping them.
Great, Bryce. Thank you so very much. Please do keep your questions coming. We are here tonight to make sure that you leave well-educated and feeling like you've got everything that you need to make those, to help us make our choices. So I'd like to hand it off back to Ellen.
Yeah, I can speak quickly to this and then I'll hand it to Josh to speak about the phase 2 concept survey results. So just as a reminder, we spoke earlier this evening about phase 1 projects, which are in the later phases of the design process. They're finalizing design, moving towards construction. Again, please leave your comments on Conveyo because that feedback is very helpful as we move towards that final design. But now we'd like to talk about some of the projects that are phased a little bit behind the other projects. So it's a staggered process. We had a concept survey open for these phase 2 projects listed here on the left earlier this spring. And we wanted to share the results from those surveys tonight and speak towards how they will be implemented into the concept development process. And then we'll also speak briefly about another area project on East Iowa Avenue. This was originally a part of the paving coordination program. Due to constraints, which we'll talk about, we're now considering a different alignment, but still prioritizing this important connection, which will tie into work at the Iowa Underpass, as well as Iowa and Santa Fe, and connect to more regional trails like the South Platte River Trail. So with that, I'll hand it off to Josh to speak about the concept survey results for these phase 2 projects.
Great, thanks, Alan. Really, you can keep going if you'd like. It sounds great. No, I'll jump in right here. I really just wanted to point one thing out again. Really, the point of this is for South Central is to create a connected bicycle and pedestrian network in the area. I just wanted to point that out one more time before we get into the results of the concept surveys for these phase 2 projects. The first one is North Sherman, and that's from 20th all the way to Colfax. So what we really heard on this corridor is that the main interest is improving crossings, especially at the kind of the bigger intersections, right? Colfax, 17th and 18th. And we also heard that many people use this for commuting, so coming in and out of downtown or in kind of that North Cap Hill or Uptown area. One of the interesting things too I wanted to point out was we did see a lot of people using scooters and bike share in the area and that were responding here. So we are getting a fair amount of people using micromobility these days as well. So just a quick update there, and then moving on to Pearl Emerson. And just to remind everyone, the Pearl Emerson and 11th alignment is from 20th to 3rd Avenue, but this is really replacing the two core, I wouldn't say replacing, but this is going to be the early implementation, kind of a north-south corridor that's looking at replacing the Washington-Clarkson alignments that we looked at in the network verification. But we did hear during that initial concept survey was that there would be too much parking removal on those corridors to move it forward right now. But it's still something that the city is looking at down the road. Again, one of the major things we did here is improving the crossings. And I would say that's 6th, 8th, 17th, and 18th. Those are pretty large roadways that are multi-lane and do provide challenges for people who want to cross north-south on the Emerson and Pearl corridor. I think the other thing that we want to point out here is we did see almost 240 survey comments and almost 300 survey respondents. So we know this is an important corridor, and we do want to provide a safe connection in these neighborhoods. And what we also did see is that a lot of people who responded to the survey are drivers of the corridors as well. So we are seeing a good mix of people who both bike, walk, and drive along these corridors. So the last thing I wanted to point out here is that we are getting a really good turnout of people who are living in the neighborhood that are responding to our surveys. So moving on to South Sherman. So this is south of I-25. This is from Mississippi Avenue to Harvard. And one of the other questions that I think that came up was, will the intersection of Sherman and Mississippi be improved? And the short answer is yes. We're looking at both a bikeway and an improved pedestrian connection at that intersection. So I wanted to point that out. Also, I think there was, to kind of build upon that, there was really a lot of support for improving the intersection of Mississippi and Logan, and I think Trung hit on that as well. So our designs are already looking at improving and incorporating the comments that we've heard in these concept surveys. The last thing I wanted to point out again is that 88% of the people who responded live in this neighborhood. So again, getting people's input from people who actually know these corridors and these intersections. Moving on to 2nd Avenue. A quick update here on 2nd Avenue. This is a new alignment, which is, it's actually turned out to be a really great alignment. We were looking at 3rd Avenue early on, but some of the constraints that we looked at during the alternatives analysis phase of that project really gave us pause and had us look at a different corridor. So we looked at 2nd Avenue, and really this is going to provide a great connection all the way to Clarkson and South Pearl, and ultimately cross Spear Boulevard and make a great connection to Cherry Creek. We asked people to rate kind of what is their highest priority for this corridor. And what we heard was reducing speeds, reducing traffic along this corridor, and then also improving the crossing. So looking at crossings like Lincoln and Broadway, there is a big, strong support to make those crossings safer and more intuitive for people biking and walking. And the other thing was there was a support for looking at slowing vehicles along the corridor. So our designs are starting to look at incorporating traffic circles, median islands, and also curb extensions. And then moving further south, we want to look at Florida Avenue. And so this is kind of a short connection from South Sherman to Corona Street or Bucktel. And there was a lot of strong interest in improving crossings and reducing traffic, similar to the other corridors. But specifically, the other thing people wanted to do was make sure we're tying to Bucktel Avenue as well, which will be a future buffered or protected bike lane. So really creating a connection that allows people to move south as well. The other thing we did here is that people use Florida Avenue to access recreation, whether it's the Bucktel Trail or the South Platte River Trail. So really focusing on that. And I'll talk a little bit more about how Florida will come into play with the alignment, the new alignment for East Iowa that Ellen talked about earlier. And then finally, I want to talk about South Franklin. It's another north-south connection from Bucktel all the way down to the Dartmouth Avenue. So basically the southern limit of Denver, a pretty long corridor. Again, there was strong interest for improving crossings, especially at the bigger streets like Yale and Evans and Bucktel. But the other thing we want to just point out too is we did hear a fair amount of people tell us that they use this for recreation, commuting, and getting to school. So a pretty good mix of uses of who's using this corridor. So improving it for all users along the corridors. So I want to take a quick break there and move to Iowa. So I want to talk a little more about Iowa Avenue. Like Ellen mentioned, that this was part of a repaving project that started early. But as we got into the alternatives analysis process, we realized that there was quite a few constraints in getting across Broadway and connecting to Sherman. And I won't go into too many details, but really we didn't feel like there was we could come up with a safe alternative that allowed bicycles to get from the future construction of the Iowa underpass to Platte Park and also to the North Sherman or South Sherman neighborhood bikeway. So what we really wanted to focus on here is how we looked at an alternative alignment. And so instead of taking Iowa all the way to the east, we looked at going up north, south of Coma Street to Florida Avenue, and that would also cross Broadway and then connecting to the East Florida and South Sherman neighborhood bikeway. And this would include an improvement on Broadway to get people across that street safely. And luckily, we do have some, the recent, probably 10 years ago, the improvements, there's a refuge median island already there. So looking at what traffic control device would make that crossing even safer and connecting that network in the area. So I want to hand it off to Vanita there for our next Q&A break.
Thank you, Josh. So I think I'd like to start our next round of questions going to Bryce. Bryce, there's a question about road surface. And I think it's question 18 that we have in our little hidden Q&A box. And the question's from James. What is being done to ensure the road surface of these targeted routes is safe, free from potholes and depressions, poorly covered valve covers or manhole covers that swallow bike wheels and cause crashes?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question, James. So something that we do in design is walk every corridor from beginning to end, and we do look for things like that. And we can report them to street maintenance. We're typically not going to do those fixes as a part of our project, but we will report them to street maintenance. And that's something that anyone can do as well by submitting a 311. It's hard to catch every single pothole. So if there's one that you see, call 311. It will go straight to street maintenance and they'll be able to handle it.
Thank you so much, Bryce. I want to come back to you for question 11. Is the design of the traffic diversion at Emerson and Bayout going to be reevaluated? Currently, it does not divert traffic successfully like it does at Bayout and Lincoln.
Yeah, definitely. So that is some feedback that we've taken into account, that Bayout and Lincoln is working and Bayout and Emerson is not. So for any future diversion that we're doing as a part of South Central Community Network as a whole, we're implementing similar to what Bayout and Lincoln is. As for the current condition at Emerson and Bayout, we're first going to start with improved signage and a hardened center line. So a hardened center line will make it more visible that vehicles and will deter some vehicles to not make that turn, but will still allow emergency vehicles like fire trucks to drive over it, so that they can still have access in that block no matter what they need to do. So that's just some of the feedback we've received and are implementing in the future.
Thank you, Bryce. Ellen, I'd like to come back to you. There's a question from Robert. Does Dottie have any plans to create a navigable bike route from South City Park neighborhood to downtown that does not involve crossing either 17th Avenue or Colfax Avenue?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, all community networks are pulling from our citywide bike plan, Denver Moves Bicycles. That area of town is actually a little bit further east outside of the South Central Community Transportation Network area. And not all of the lines on the Denver Moves Bicycles map are currently heading towards implementation. It is a long-term and visionary plan. So there are lots of recommendations that are still seeking funding and still seeking programmatic support to move forward. Also want to highlight in that area of town, the East and East Central area Neighborhood Planning Initiative or NPI plans, which were recently adopted by council, also did a great amount of work to update recommendations in that area. And we're still incorporating that and figuring out how to coordinate with the NPI process to then update our citywide plans with transportation networks in mind. So that connection that you mentioned is not moving forward as part of the community transportation networks. It's outside of the area, but again, want to point to those larger citywide plans where we are thinking about the network overall and continually seeking how we can implement more lines on that map moving forward.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I've got a question from Matt. Will there now be no changes to 3rd Avenue? Car speeds are much higher than nearby streets because of its design that prioritizes car traffic. Please don't give up on making a street safer. That's from Matt.
Yeah, I can try to, okay, go ahead if you want, Ellen.
Oh yeah, I'll start and then hand it off to you, Bryce. So part of the reason that we looked at an alternative corridor to 3rd Avenue is as we dug into it, 3rd Avenue is actually a fairly narrow corridor. It's about 30 feet curb to curb. And as we were looking at our standards and how to make that work, we were just running up against lots of constraints that made what we felt was a high comfort facility very difficult with our current scope and budget. And when we run into issues like that, we don't give up on the connection in the network. Rather, we look at different routes, alternative options that we can look at to see if there is a nearby connection that still makes that connection within the bike network. Through that process, that's how we identified 2nd Avenue as a potential neighborhood bikeway and are now moving forward with that concept. So that's just a little bit of background, and I don't know, Bryce, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just add that in the near term, as a part of this bike community network project, we were able to swap the corridors there because we're focusing on bike facilities. That isn't to say that 3rd Ave will never see improvements in the future. Depending on the situation and what type of projects we're seeing come through, it may happen, it may not. At this point, though, as for South Central Community Network, we have converted 2nd Ave.
Thank you, Bryce. We've got a question, Ellen, I'm coming to you from Ryan. Broadway in Florida does not have a signal at this time, unlike Broadway in Iowa. Would this new alignment include a new traffic signal?
Great question. So yes, that's part of the analysis that we're digging into, and part of why we were originally looking at the alignment on Iowa. We were looking in part to leverage that current signal at Broadway and Iowa. Like I mentioned, similar to some other corridors on Iowa Avenue, we ran into lots of constraints. Just really quickly, again, a narrow corridor width, curb to curb. There's a center line misalignment at Broadway and Iowa, which as that continues to move, can sometimes create very dangerous conditions, as well as other considerations throughout the corridor that again led us to look towards alternative options. So in short, the answer to your question is yes, we're looking at what we can do at Florida and Broadway. That will likely include a significant crossing improvement there. There is a concrete median in that stretch of the road, which we actually feel will be helpful. We can carve into that, potentially use that to help as a diversion element that we use in several other neighborhood bikeway corridors, and that in conjunction with improved crossing infrastructure, we think that that will make that alignment successful and help us still create that really important connection in this area of the network, recognizing that we were just coming up against a lot of constraints and challenges on the original Iowa routing. Great question.
And I think our final question is, what makes a neighborhood bikeway different from various other bike lane types?
I can speak to that, and then Bryce, if you want to hop in with anything else that I've missed. Neighborhood Bikeway is unique in that it is still a fairly new facility for Denver. That does not mean it's new nationwide. These are used in several cities across the nation, but often called different names like bicycle boulevards, shared streets, neighborhood streets. Neighborhood bikeways in the Denver context are unique from other bike facilities in that it is a shared condition. There is not a separate lane for bicycles in a neighborhood bikeway, but rather a shared lane where vehicles and bikes share that space. And then design elements are included throughout the corridor to slow vehicles and deter non-local trips of vehicles to help make that street remain a low volume and low speed neighborhood condition. So a lot of the shared street aspects that we've heard a lot of positive feedback on have a lot in common with neighborhood bikeways. And Bayout Avenue is a really good example of some neighborhood bikeway designs and improvements that were installed as part of that shared street going to be a neighborhood bikeway. Again, just want to note, we do feel that this is high comfort in part because we are including designs that significantly change the condition of the road and or ensure that it remains low vehicle volume and low traffic, so that shared condition is truly comfortable and it stays a shared neighborhood street.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all of our experts tonight. Appreciate the wonderful answers and great questions. That concludes our Q&A session for tonight, and I'm going to hand it right back to Ellen so you can hear about how you can review information from our website and get deeper dive into the materials for these corridors. So back to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Benita. So we recognize there are a lot of exciting projects moving forward as part of the South Central Community Network, but also the Central and Northwest Community Networks. So just want to highlight where you can always find updated project information, regardless of the phase of the corridor or where it's at in the process. You can go to our project website. That's at bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. And from there, you can navigate to any of the community networks. Today, we're going to talk about South Central. So on this website, once you go to the South Central Denver link here on this webpage, you'll be able to see lots of information about all of the projects, as well as opportunities to give feedback throughout the process. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, there's a projects tab, which when you click that, it will then show a table of all of the project corridors that are currently being considered as part of the South Central Community Network. At the far right, there will be links to documents There are also links directly to Conveo for the appropriate corridors that we talked about earlier this evening. Again, those are those phase 1 corridors that are moving towards finalized design with construction in mind. If you click that Documents tab, however, you'll be able to see all of the previous work that has led to where we're at on these corridors. That includes existing conditions, alternatives analysis, and network verification, if applicable, as well as survey results and FAQs. So just wanted to give that reminder that always you can find updated project information at our project website. So want to close out tonight. Thank you for hanging with us. I know we have a lot of updates, but again, please leave your comments on the projects that are moving towards construction as early as later this year in 2021. That feedback window will close on Friday, May 14th. Again, we dropped the link in the chat, but you can get to those concept designs at bit.ly/SCCTN Conveo. Please also share updated materials and information with your neighbors and friends. Again, you can find that at our project website as we just walked through. You can also sign up for office hours at the project website, and you can always email us at denvermoves@denvergov.org. Please just include South Central Community Network in the subject line, but we will be in touch with you to answer any questions that you might have in that capacity as well. So again, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your time tonight and look forward to your feedback on those phase 1 projects through Conveo. Thank you.